Hey guys, Coach Highway from GameLeap here, and in today's video we will be talking about Hanzo, the mid-range dueling beast. Hanzo has had some issues falling into a great spot in the GM meta for Season 1 due to the nature of the game's super fast-paced, high mobility, and one-shot driven meta. He is just okay in this system, and there is a list of better options and picks. However, due to the constant miscalculations or mistakes present in lower end play, and honestly even higher end play, he can be an actual menace throughout the early ranks and well into the higher ones. If you like the idea of hitting back-to-back-to-back close range, quick headshots, and killing 4 or 5 people all on your own, Hanzo is an excellent character for you. Let's get started in explaining how, and I'll even include some fantastic tips to help you get more value out of your abilities. I think you'll be surprised how many tricks there are despite his very simple and intuitive kit. Before we get into it, however, let's talk about the best way for you to improve your game sense altogether. I'm talking, of course, about the GameLeap website. We post obviously helpful things on YouTube, but if you want to get into the real meat of the conversations, the tricks, and the guides, then you'll find much more in-depth and detailed step-by-step guides outlined on our site. We have a ridiculous amount of guides, in fact nearly 100 posted from just week 1, so be sure to come and check us out, and with all of that out of the way, let's get right into the video. I'm going to structure the video like this. We'll start with some very quick, simple tips on aim, and then we'll move on to some general positioning, and finally we'll cover his abilities and his kit. The first thing you need to know about Hanzo is that he is very much aim-based. This should not deter you from learning or enjoying him, of course, it just means that you'll need to practice your aim consistently. However, there are 2 overpowered tricks that are used at high levels to increase your accuracy pretty much right away. The first tip is to learn patience and either wait for someone to change their movement direction or to continue walking in a straight line for an extended period and give away their pattern. Since most enemies, even as early as gold, are going to be changing directions and strafing to try to avoid enemy shots, you can use this to your advantage. This is because it's rare that someone will not continue going in a direction after they start strafing. Generally speaking, they are either going to be people who move back and forth in a rapid, consistent pattern, which we'll get to in just a second, or they're going to be people who walk one way for a few seconds and then walk the other way for a few seconds, and then they repeat, often in rhythm with their enemy's fire rate to try to throw them off. With those that switch directions for a few seconds, you can actually abuse their mindless movement pattern to hit shots on a straight moving target, which is the most predictable opponent to fire arrows at, since you can just set your crosshair to where they're going rather than having to constantly react and then try to predict. Simply put your crosshair a little bit behind them rather than in front of them and be ready for when they switch directions to fire. For the second tip, it involves shooting at the targets that are rapidly strafing back and forth, making their hitbox extremely hard to keep track of and actually land a shot on. It can be intuitive to try to hit them at the edges of their movement, but in reality this is actually a more difficult shot. The best thing to do is actually center your crosshair in the middle of where they are going back and forth and fire as they come back to that center. This requires the least amount of precision and will make your shot surprisingly easy. So when you find yourself facing an enemy, try to figure out as soon as possible which kind of movement your target uses and apply either tip 1 or tip 2 accordingly for a much easier time aiming. These tips actually continue to work all the way up into the higher ranks, and I use them all the time. However, while these tricks can help your shots be more consistent, it's still important to continually practice your aim regardless and always be looking to improve it. Go and take a look at our perfect warm-up guide to make sure your aim is always hot and ready to go and improving whenever you launch Overwatch. Also, if these 2 tips end up helping you, be sure to like and subscribe for more great content to come. Okay, so moving on to his positioning, it's important to know where Hanzo thrives at. He is a close to mid-range beast, since these are where his arrows maintain the most consistency. The fact that they are projectiles make them simply unreliable in long distances, as it is much more likely that an enemy will stray off of their predicted path. You have to predict much farther in the future, so any target that has a decent movement speed or small hitbox becomes nigh impossible to hit without just dumb luck, which sort of just relegates you to spamming the large hitbox tanks. Hanzo can land lots of one-shots at close range, but this still wouldn't be what I consider to be his best. It's harder to hit closer targets, and there are other characters such as Genji which excel much more and pose significant threats to you. That being said, a good Hanzo can still duel and outplay these heroes, it just isn't a position you should force yourself into. So stick to that mid-range where it's easy to track the enemy heroes and still land shots from, and it's just overall a much safer range to play. Always remember that the closer the range, the more danger, but more reliability in your shots, and vice versa. Unless you're literally right in their face, base, by the way, because then your shots are going to be unreliable still. Hanzo also benefits from being able to use walls to have movement options since he has his wall climb. Be sure that when you're setting up to hold a position, you try to be near a high ground you can climb up to in order to get away from danger. And when you're holding a high ground, don't be afraid to drop down to bait diving enemies to run after you before you wall climb right back up, leaving them on the ground confused. Okay, so now we finally get into the real meat of Hanzo, his kit. So first we have Sonic Arrow, and this is one of the most underrated and powerful abilities in the entire game. It allows for you to land easy shots on unsuspecting enemies who will be going in a straight line around the corner. It also lets you set your team up for extremely easy shots and plays of their own. The best example of this is of course when you're playing against an enemy Widowmaker, you want to Sonic them as often as possible. This lets your team land shots and pressure her out, or even if not, you can at least know her sight lines and be able to effectively avoid them. It's also good to use Sonic Arrow to set up your ultimate ability, which we will talk about soon enough. One final piece of advice is that you can actually bounce your Sonic Arrow around corners and into hard to reach spots by attaching it to a Storm Arrow. This is really only useful when you're trying to set up your teammate for a massive play, or when you're using your dragons, as doing this often will leave you with no way of landing a shot on these faraway enemies, and it'll leave you without your Storm Arrow for the fight, effectively wasting 2 different cooldowns. So be sure that when you do this, you have a clear follow-up plan. Outside of what's already been mentioned, the only other noteworthy thing is that Sonic Arrow can detect Sombra sometimes when invisible, but really this is a difficult and not super effective way to use it. Either way, please don't undervalue your Sonic like many Hanzos do, and be sure to always maximize your value out of it. Our next ability is Storm Arrow, and this is a vital piece of Hanzo's damage output. It gives him a tool for bursting down tanks who get too close, and it gives him an option for when he is fighting a close range enemy and needs multiple opportunities to land a shot, especially against hard to hit enemies. The best tip for using this is to try to fire a full charged arrow right before you pop this ability. This can do a quick 125 damage on a body shot or 250 on a headshot, making it easier for the Storm Arrow to follow up on the high amount of burst damage. Also keep in mind Storm Arrow shots will ricochet and allow for you to possibly finish off fleeing targets. This also allows for you to hit enemies who are holding close to a corner and waiting to peek you, or avoiding your LOS. Think of a Widowmaker using a corner to charge her shot before swinging out with it to go for a kill. Once she goes back around the corner, you can spam Storm Arrow on a wall directly behind her to possibly bounce them back and kill her. Plus you also have the chance of her swinging out and getting hit directly by the arrows just by random chance. Not much else to cover for Storm Arrows, just try not to waste them, especially if the enemy team has a tank like Winston, which can push you and try to kill you close, which means that you'll need the burst damage to save yourself. Hanzo's dash is his most simple ability, and honestly there's very little to say about it. It's pretty short range, but it's still good for creating a little bit of separation or for chasing a target who's running away around a wall. There isn't a ton to mention aside from, much like Storm Arrow, being sure to have it in the event of a dive or other situation which requires you to escape. You can also use it while ulting to give yourself a bit of movement and become a slightly harder target to hit while stuck casting the dragons. Finally, for Hanzo's kit, we have his ultimate, known commonly as Dragons. Dragons are a fantastic ultimate for catching enemies in chokes, stopping them from retreating, following up on ultimates like Flex or Grav, and the fact that they go through walls makes them incredibly versatile and powerful, and usually gives you a safe spot to cast them from. My biggest piece of advice is to always use your Sonic Arrow before your dragons in order to set yourself up for an easy time while being able to see the enemies. Remember that, unless they are stacked up in a small room or choke, you want to use your dragons on where they are going to be, or at the very least in between one group and the other, so your team can push them and kill the separated targets. Keep in mind dragons makes you vulnerable as you are forced to stand still. However, there are a couple of things you can do to circumvent this. One thing has already been mentioned, and that's the leap being usable while Hanzo's casting his ult. The thing that we haven't mentioned is a pretty overlooked trick. You can charge up a normal arrow while his ult is in the cast animation. This lets him have an arrow ready to fire as soon as he is done with casting his ult, meaning any flankers such as Tracer who have decided to try to push you while you were supposed to be an easy pick can suddenly find themselves in a situation where they're just getting one shot. Just another quick little tip for Hanzo that didn't really fit any of the sections: a body shot plus a melee can kill a full HP enemy Tracer, giving Hanzo a consistent way to kill her quickly if she gets too close, even without a headshot. And with that, we have come to the end of Hanzo's guide for today. I hope you guys enjoyed and got some solid information out of it here. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out our website for more educational content. I will see you all soon. Take care and peace.